Over the last 3 years, generative AI, and large language models specifically, have simultaneously become the largest investment project in the history of mankind, and an existential shakeup to the way mankind operates. Within just the last year, the major tech companies have spent the equivalent of 13 Manhattan projects or 2 Apollo moon landings on developing this technology within America alone. In the process, some logical questions have been raised that nobody really wants to think about too much. Like, if AI really does live up to the hype and comprehensively replaces all human work, who is going to be left to buy anything from these companies? Before we even get to that, there is the more immediate problem for regular people, that if this technology really can do everything it's promised to do, then we are going to lose our jobs. But if this technology fails to start delivering those results soon, it will probably cause a meltdown in financial markets that will cause us to lose our jobs. The stock market, not to mention the economy itself, is almost single-handedly being kept afloat by the hundreds of billions of dollars that tech companies are piling into data center buildouts with no clear indication that these investments will ever pay off. It sounds bad, but you probably already knew all of this. The thing is, though, the people driving this whole industry actually do have some good answers to these logical paradoxes. The only problem is, they may not be what you want to hear.
Brad, if you want to sell your shares, I'll find you a buyer.
Meta will invest hundreds of billions of dollars into compute build-out, multiple multi-gigawatt clusters in the works.
As you grow faster, you grow that CapEx faster. I think the investment community is going to demand ROIs on that CapEx earlier.
Microsoft shares fell more than 10% in early trade on Thursday. Investors are concerned after record AI spending and cloud momentum slows.
Companies have been trying to cut down on workers for as long as those workers have demanded pay and benefits. Whether it's downsizing, outsourcing, streamlining, understaffing, or automating, if there is something a business can do to get rid of workers and their salaries, you better believe they are going to do it. But this time does feel a little bit different. Recent AI advances have been mocked for not quite living up to the bold claims of their tech bro founders. But even in their current imperfect form, LLMs, general-use robots, and generative models are already replacing jobs, and they are getting better every day. So that's bad for workers. But if you're a senior corporate executive or company owner, maybe you should be asking yourself, if we automate everybody's job, who is going to buy all of your shit? I have some good news and some bad news for your theoretical company. The good news is that labor reduction systems of all varieties have already cut out millions of man-hours in America alone and made the workers who are left more efficient at their jobs. Artificial intelligence is just another tool that your company can use to get more work out of fewer staff or replace teams entirely. Even here at Little Ol' Works Media Group, we used to have someone working part-time whose job it was to cut out images on Photoshop to use in our goofy little animations. Now, Adobe Suite has inbuilt AI features which can automatically remove backgrounds from any image with absolutely no human time or skill involved. Now, we love our editors, so we gave him more work editing our history videos. But there are a lot of companies that now don't need to or don't want to employ people for these simple jobs. According to a survey of 697 companies conducted by Metrigy, a research and strategic advisory firm, whatever that means, companies who did not use AI in calendar 2023 hired 89% more agents than those who did use AI in their contact centers. For existing employees, it was even worse. When AI was added to a contact center, 36.8% of companies laid off an average of 26.1% of their employees. These alarming numbers were within just 1 year, and just within call centers, which have already been hit by outsourcing, understaffing, and automation harder than most other professional services. For now. So, congratulations. Your business now has reduced headcount and significantly reduced expenses. But here comes the bad news. In 1914, Henry Ford doubled the salary of his factory workers to $5 per day. The story goes he did this because he wanted all of his employees to be able to afford a Ford Model T of their own, boosting company revenue. Now, this is basically complete nonsense. In reality, Ford just wanted to reduce staff turnover and deny talent to up-and-coming car companies like Dodge to maintain his monopoly over the growing automobile industry. But as with every good fairy tale, there is a nugget of truth in there. If the employment rate suddenly drops as hard as it did in the call centers from the study in every company around the world, then companies will undeniably struggle with reduced revenue as people without jobs don't have the buying power they once did, and even people with jobs will cut back out of fear that they might be next. But there is a business plan that you, as a hypothetical titan of industry, might want to consider so that this isn't a problem. And that's just making stuff exclusively for other wealthy business owners while diverting resources away from people who have nothing to offer you that can't be done more efficiently by a machine or a cheaper worker on the other side of the world. Now, if you think that sounds a bit crazy, you should know that it's already kind of happening. And the best place to see it is in video games. Yes, those occasionally fun distractions from real life are the perfect example of this shift happening in the real world right now. So let me cook. According to Grandview Research, the video game industry is now bigger than the movie, music, and television industries combined, and it has honed in its most profitable strategy. Free-to-play games are ironically some of the most profitable games on the market, because they have perfected a business strategy called freemium pricing. Most people will play their games for free, but a select few, affectionately known in the industry as whales, will spend thousands, sometimes even millions of dollars on a single game to unlock in-game perks that would be almost impossible to obtain as a free user. It's important that these games still have free users though, because without them, the whales would have nobody to show off to or pwn with their paid-for advantages. In a world where people are looking for budget-friendly forms of entertainment, the game industry has realized that the best way to turn a profit is to cater to those who have the financial means, or at the very least, the credit limit, to spend ridiculous amounts of money on a video game. The people who have the most financial means don't work for their money. They own income-producing assets. And if automation does replace jobs on an even more widespread scale, that will make your ability to work less valuable and simultaneously income-producing assets more valuable. The rate of change in AI and automation makes the future impossible to predict. But if the people investing in these technologies want to see a financial return on that investment, they are going to learn what the game industry already has. There is more money to be made by catering to other rich people, and everybody else can be kept around as entertainment. Now, if you think that sounds a bit depressing, well, welcome to this channel. But also, I should tell you that market trends already say this is happening. AI isn't going to change your world. It's just going to continue a trend that's already been happening for years now. So it's time to learn how money works to find out how companies are adapting to a world where nobody can afford anything anymore. Some of the most valuable assets in the modern economy are things you cannot sell. Your files, documents, and spreadsheets generate real value, just not for you. That's why this video is sponsored by Proton Drive. Proton is the team behind Proton Mail, trusted by over 100 million people worldwide, from newsrooms and activists to security experts. They are built based in Europe with a privacy-first mission and strong protection shaped by the European regulatory context. Proton Drive is end-to-end encrypted cloud storage, so your files, photos, and even metadata stay private. Nothing is scanned, nothing is profiled, and your data is never used to train AI models. This matters a lot for things like work documents, budgets, and financial spreadsheets. Proton Drive also includes Proton Docs and Proton Sheets, so you can write, calculate, and collaborate with the same encryption guarantees, meaning only you and the people you choose can access that content. I use Proton Drive for both work files and personal projects I do not want exposed. Everything stays synced across my devices, and I like knowing my cloud storage is private by default. And when I need to send something, I can share files with password-protected or expiring links. If you want cloud storage that is private by default and free to get started, you can try Proton Drive using the link in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to Proton Drive for sponsoring this video. In the 1992 movie Glengarry Glen Ross, the iconic Always Be closing scene has Alec Baldwin's character bragging to another salesman about driving an $80,000 BMW. Adjusted for 1992 dollars, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that would be the equivalent of just under $182,000 today. That is a very expensive automobile, to be sure. But these days, if you drive around a major city, you are likely to see dozens of cars that cost that much or more, and they probably wouldn't even stand out that much. According to company sales data and historic records, Lamborghini has sold more cars in the last 10 years alone than it did in all the rest of the company's history combined, because there is simply a bigger market for $300,000 cars than ever before. The same general trend is true for other extreme luxury brands like Bentley, Ferrari, Patek Philippe, luxury groceries at Erewhon, gym memberships that cost more than rent, hotels that make Hilton look like a Holiday Inn, and to top it off, private jets are all now way more popular than they ever have been. One thing that often gets lost in discussions of wealth inequality is that, yes, billionaires are getting richer, But there are also far more rich people around than ever before, and it's because the value of an hour of human labor has stayed more or less stagnant, while the value of an asset and the availability of credit has skyrocketed. People who held onto an even modest portfolio over the last 4 years now have enormous fortunes. Certain individuals got incredibly lucky with good investments, and other people accessed easy credit to get absolutely jacked to the tits on leverage and ride the longest asset bull run in history. Very few people have made modern fortunes through work alone. And you might have even noticed how investing went from something that you should do to secure your retirement to something you need to do to have any quality of life at all. If robots really do take over, then it will just continue to push the value of an hour of human work down, because it could be done by a machine instead. And it will rally the value of assets because business owners and investors will benefit from the free labor substitute. This is where people point to policy fixes like a universal basic income. If you haven't heard about this idea by now, that's impressive. But it's basically a government payment made to everybody, regardless of personal financial conditions, that should be enough to cover basic living expenses. It's been proposed as a solution to keep the whole system going if people can't earn an income for themselves because their labor has been outsourced or automated. But that is still not a desirable outcome for anybody. If comprehensive automation of human labor gets as far as needing this, then you will fall into one of two defined classes of people. You will either be getting by based on a government lifeline, or you will be in the class of people that own the businesses complaining about all the taxes they need to pay to fund that lifeline. I find it a little bit easier to sympathize with one of those groups. But there are still no winners. Just last week, the results of one of the most comprehensive universal basic income experiments was published. The research gave 1,000 people living in Texas and Illinois $1,000 a month with no conditions attached. To qualify for this study, their 2019 household income had to be less than 300% of the federal poverty line, or $37,470 for an individual. There was also an unlucky control group of 2,000 people who were only given $50 a month. This is because when your personal finances are being studied, you are more likely to be careful about your spending decisions, and the researchers wanted to control for these changes. The study itself was funded by an organization called Open Research, which is not technically affiliated with OpenAI, but they are both managed by Sam Altman, who has been very vocal about how this technology could displace billions of jobs. Now, if you ever find yourself running an AI startup that burns millions of dollars a day, then one of the best ways to ensure that you keep that investor money coming is to pretend to be really scared about how your technology is going to replace workers, because, well, replacing workers is really exciting to investors. So realistically, this study was probably little more than a marketing stunt conducted by one of the best funded organizations in the space. But that doesn't mean that the results aren't still interesting. The key results related to employment was that the group that received the $1,000 payment ended up earning significantly less for themselves than the control group. After the payment was accounted for, they still earned more. But $12,000 alone is not enough to live anywhere in America without other forms of support. All households ended up earning more, but that was largely because this experiment started right at the beginning of COVID, when employment, particularly in low-wage professions, was hurt by lockdowns. The reason the researchers gave as to why households receiving the subsidy ended up earning less money for themselves was because many people took it as an opportunity to cut down on how much they were working and commit more time to leisure and looking after their family. This fits the optimistic idea of an AI future where we can have machines do everything for us while we just relax and collect universal basic income. But the findings still told a story of people who were financially struggling. Mental health improved because people were less stressed, but those improvements faded by the end of the first year. Food security also increased, but again only in the first year, as even people with additional income fell victim to rising living expenses, and that was when they could work to earn additional money. When compared to being plunged into poverty, it's an okay compromise. But this isn't going to happen overnight. Outsourcing turned entire cities in America into ghost towns, but it happened so slowly that big changes like this never got addressed. The endgame for people investing into automation is to build that automated utopian future. The endgame for everyone else is to make sure that they aren't excluded from it. The thing is, though, that the very senior executives trying to use AI to reduce their staff costs were not expecting that they too might be replaceable. Senior executives, business owners, and management consultants all have a strong incentive to cut down costs in their businesses wherever they can. It's been less than 3 years since ChatGPT first launched. But since then, all of these people have clearly been planning a way to replace expensive human intelligence work with far cheaper artificial intelligence work. You could almost argue that as business leaders with a fiduciary duty to their shareholders, they would be irresponsible not to pursue this potential cost cutting, and the market would probably agree with you. Already, several high-profile business leaders and entire teams have been fired for not going all in on AI. But for everybody else who did, there have been a few problems along the way. These managers are realizing that most jobs are more nuanced and variable than the reports could truly capture, and at the same time, AI is turning out to be a lot more expensive than they expected. Now, for a lot of businesses, this hasn't really slowed them down. Some of you watching have so perfectly put it that you are not worried that artificial intelligence can do your job. You are worried that some manager will think it can do your job. A lot of businesses are now in the find out stage of this cost-cutting exercise and have started begging their workers to come back. However, there is something else that has come out of this. It turns out that the most expensive and most analytical work in a business is done by senior executives and management consultants. The boys got really excited about layoffs, without stopping to think who might be the first to go.
The thinking jobs are the ones that are most at risk from artificial intelligence.
The AI experiment here for McDonald's doesn't seem to have gone that great.
It's been revealed Deloitte used artificial intelligence to prepare a report to the federal government's Department of Employment and Workplace Relations.
Big mistake, really, to underestimate how quickly these AI models could improve. So McKinsey's second centuries is going to present some very profound challenges for it.
Management consulting firms like Bain & Company, McKinsey, and BCG bring in billions of dollars in revenue every year from a long list of corporate clients that go to them for advice on how to run their company. That advice can be on anything from how to expand into a new country down to who to hire as their next CEO. Since this is something that most companies do not do on a regular basis, they hire these firms because they do handle these cases all the time, so they can give workable advice based on the experience they gained from other companies they have helped in the past. That's the theory anyway. In reality, one of the biggest problems with management consulting firms is that a bulk of the actual work gets delegated down to junior analysts who are, more often than not, fresh out of college. Since it's typically a bit awkward to have someone who is still learning to put on their tie tell an executive with decades of experience how to run their business, these guys are typically delegated to roles behind the scenes. They will collect and collate huge amounts of data from the company's own records, pair that with information they gather about the broader industry, and then pass those insights along to a partner on their team. The partner will then fact-check their work, grill them over all the dumb mistakes they have made, and then once that is all done, they will use the gathered information to make recommendations to the business. The actual end product that gets handed over to the company is almost always an extensive PowerPoint presentation and report that the most senior consultant on the team presents to management. Now, I promised myself I wouldn't let this whole video devolve into a rant about management consultants, but you can probably already start to see the problem with this particular business model. Collecting, digesting, and regurgitating huge amounts of data into something somewhat actionable with a healthy amount of fact-checking is exactly what current AI models excel at. Good consulting team leaders are going to double-check the work of their juniors anyway. Additionally, when they hand back their findings and recommendations for them to turn into a nice-looking presentation, modern AI programs can do that too. A report by Harvard Business Review found that groups within these firms were changing from a pyramid structure with lots of juniors at the bottom and then tapering headcount towards senior manager partners to today where the corporate structure is representing more of an obelisk. Fewer juniors at the bottom doing legwork, all assisted by AI programs to maintain the rainmakers at the top actually bringing in the contracts. Of course, since these consulting teams are working with internal reports from major companies that are often listed on public markets, data security is a massive consideration. So they shouldn't just mindlessly upload sensitive files to ChatGPT, although they frequently have been caught doing exactly that. In just the most beautiful twist of unintentional irony in a headline ever, Deloitte was caught using AI to produce a report delivered to the government of Australia on a contract reportedly worth over $250,000. They were discovered because they omitted the fact-checking part of this entire operation, and just ran with the numbers that AI spat out. The ironic part was that this $250,000 report was about the most effective ways to crack down on overly generous government welfare. But anyway, the issue here was not that Deloitte was using AI at all. In a press release about this particular incident, they proudly announced that they were actually investing $3 billion into AI. The problem was that they hadn't bothered to fact-check it at all. They submitted their homework with references to non-existent academic papers and completely fabricated federal court judgments. Either way, these consulting firms are still going full steam ahead with AI implementations in their own workplace, and they have reasons beyond just cutting down their own staffing costs. Revenue for most of the major consulting firms have been skyrocketing in recent years. Deloitte, for example, has doubled the revenue over the last decade, and high-end boutiques like BCG have tripled theirs. A major driver for this revenue growth has been consulting other companies on how to implement AI into their own workflows. by going all in on AI that can better present their firm as subject matter experts to this new group of highly lucrative clients, even if the results have so far been questionable. However, while this has been a boon to business in the short term, it could end up being a major risk to the industry in its entirety. As part of a study which we will actually dive into soon, a group of researchers from Cambridge noted that most of the hard work of these consulting firms can be done by data digesting AI systems. So, why would companies pay firms like McKinsey hundreds of thousands of dollars when they could get the same vaguely reliable recommendations internally? It's no secret anymore that, more often than not, when hiring outside consulting firms, a lot of company managers have already decided what they wanted to do already, and they just want a firm like McKinsey to officially agree with them. Depending on the industry, it could be just as impressive to a clueless board to say that key business decisions were driven by cutting-edge generative models as it would be to say our decisions were thoroughly vetted by top industry consultants. Translated from corpo, they both mean the same thing anyway. There is, however, one group of jobs that have shown great promise when it comes to, let's use corporate consulting speak to say, refining headcount. The only problem is, they are the same people that hire the consultants in the first place. So there is a general assumption that when and if new technologies come for our jobs, the process of elimination will start from the bottom and that the people running the companies will just end up lording over a big army of robots. However, early research has found that there might be 3 big advantages from starting at the top first, and equally 3 challenges that stop it from actually happening. First and foremost, senior executives just cost a lot more than average workers. You have probably heard that stat before, but according to the Economic Policy Institute, the average CEO at the top 350 firms in America now makes 280 times more than their average employee. And that number is actually down from the big spikes after 1999, 2008, and COVID-19. At the same time, a report by MIT found that over 95% of AI pilot studies within measured businesses were failing, especially amongst businesses that had developed their own bespoke tools. Building an AI system, hiring a team to manage that system, and investing in the accompanying machinery required to do entry-level jobs is a big task when a human could do the same thing for a modest salary. But if the role of a senior executive could be replaced, that's a massive cost saving that could easily pay the salaries of a full team of engineers there to babysit the system and make sure it doesn't go off the rails. Now, if you do what the attention-grabbing headlines didn't want to do and actually read this report, they go on to say that by far, the best implementation of AI is in small tools that augment human work rather than try to replace it entirely. Now, this is not a great sign for the swelling investments made by AI companies into radically restructuring the nature of work itself, but it's also not a great sign for people at the top of the corporate ladder. Another study, conducted by professors at Cambridge University in collaboration with industry experts and published in the Harvard Business Review, ran a test pitting 344 business students and business executives up against an off-the-shelf AI model. They simulated a company in the auto industry and instructed the participants to make key business decisions indicative of those made by real CEOs in real industries. Additionally, just like real CEOs, their work was also judged on 2 key metrics. The first was the overall performance of the business based on variables like market share, profit, and market capitalization. The second was not getting fired by the board of directors. Overall, the researchers found that the LLM consistently outperformed the top human participants in the trial, including the actual executives, on almost every business metric, and their conclusion as to why kind of makes sense. Business leaders should be able to make cold, calculating, and often unpopular decisions about how to run their company without letting human emotions like greed or fear sway those choices once they are made. Of course, LLMs are prone to hallucinations, or in plain English, just confidently making shit up. But the researchers actually addressed this and found that even when it did happen, the benefits outweighed the risks in these broad roles, especially since human CEOs were also prone to confidently make shit up from time to time as well. Now, this all did come with a big caveat that we will get to soon, but the final advantage of a more mechanized management hierarchy is simply availability. Getting a meeting with a CEO or other senior leaders in a large company can often take a very long time because there are a lot of functions that they oversee, and depending on how they run the company, big decisions often need to be run by them before being implemented, creating an operational bottleneck. Theoretically, a well-run piece of software could be available to approve or deny requests 24/7, eliminating that bottleneck, or more realistically, increasing the bandwidth of a smaller management team. Now, before you get too much schadenfreude from watching the layoff-happy management team score an AI own goal, there are a few problems, but also an incredibly unlikely advocate. The first and most immediate limitation is that to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley, public companies are legally required to have listed a principal executive officer, a principal financial officer, and a principal accounting officer. Normally, these people are just given the title CEO, CFO, and controller, and the last two roles are normally managed by a single person. These roles do need to be filled by actual human beings though, and this is largely so that the SEC has someone to hold accountable if the company operates in a willfully illegal manner. Even the Cambridge study simulating the role of a CEO said this was going to be one of the biggest challenges. You can't send an AI to prison, and unless they really are sentient beings with a conscience, they probably don't really care about being turned off either. However, that doesn't mean that this idea is completely dead in the water. There are still plenty of other leadership roles that can be replaced outside of these official designations, and a more pragmatic solution is just to make smaller teams of execs to do the work of many with the help of these programs. A study conducted by the Harvard School of Business on more than 50,000 participants found that this is basically what was happening in the included teams. Management structures were flattened, and the leadership that was left could simultaneously fill multiple roles while being more available to their clients and subordinates. Sounds great, right? Well, there are three problems. The first is that this study was only done on people in tech roles, who are naturally going to be more adept to using these programs and understanding their limitations. The second problem is that companies are likely to see research like this, not actually understand it, and use it as an excuse to give a person previously working one job the workload of 3 people and make it all better by tossing them a ChatGPT subscription. Beyond that, the bigger problem for average people is that if this trend continues, it's likely to be rolled out on middle managers first, which could seriously hamper regular career progression. If someone above you leaves the company, the business could hire you. Or they could give an existing manager a small pay bump to absorb that role into their own. Now, to be clear, businesses absolutely already do this all the time. The only difference is that now they can say they are doing it under the guise of promoting a flat corporate structure by implementing emerging technologies. Now, as for the CEOs themselves, the second hurdle was actually outlined in the same study that spoke about how effective an AI alternative was. It turns out that over the course of the experiment, AI excelled at maximizing business performance, beating out all the other participants. But it really sucked at not getting fired by the simulated board of directors. Now, that's not because they were anti-clanker. It's because the AI was really good at hyper-optimizing variables during regular business operations, but it was really bad at accounting for black swan events like a simulated recreation of COVID-19 disruptions. The solution put forward by the researchers was pretty obvious. AI systems can almost act like a modern autopilot for a business instead of a plane. It can handle regular operations during normal times and monitor far more data than any single human could. However, in times of crisis, it's still good to have a real human at the helm. This seemed obvious to the corporate executives addressing the study, but that may have been because it was their own jobs on the line. The exact same thing could be said about almost any other modern job being augmented by AI or any technology for that matter. But for some reason, the decision makers aren't as receptive to the same conclusion. Now, obviously I am being facetious, because of course the biggest hurdle that's really going to stop AI from replacing senior executives is that they're the ones who decide who gets replaced, and it may not surprise you to learn that they statistically consider their own jobs far harder to replicate. In a survey conducted by IBM, of all things, and Oxford Economics surveyed 3,000 global C-suite executives across 20 industries and 28 countries. 77% of respondents said entry-level positions were already seeing the effects of generative AI, and that will intensify in the next few years. However, only 22% of them said the same for executive or senior management roles. Now, the disconnect in all of this is that when they were questioned separately about specific business functions, 97% said they think employees in procurement and 93% of those in risk, compliance, and finance were already being replaced or augmented by AI in coming years. But only 77% of customer service roles were likely to be significantly disrupted. Even if AI doesn't end up replacing everyone, we could still lose our jobs anyway, simply because so many companies are jumping the gun on AI disruption. If AI fails, the entire economy collapses with it and we lose our jobs, but if AI succeeds, it will only be because it has taken all of our jobs. Whether we like it or not, our immediate economic future is riding on the success or failure of this technology. Just the top companies are on track to spend $400 billion on data center buildouts this year alone, and the entire stock market has clearly been buoyed by investor hype around what this technology could do at some undetermined point in the future. Now, that has done two things in the short term. Trillions of dollars worth of data centers may or may not turn out to be a spectacular waste of money. But, at least for now, they are providing tens of thousands of high-paying jobs to engineers, tradesmen, and technicians all across the country. The same goes for the stock market. These impressive gains may or may not be backed by sustainable fundamentals. But, at least for now, people who have seen their portfolios double in value over the last 3 years are feeling pretty good about treating themselves to a bit of conspicuous consumption, helping to keep the rest of the economy afloat. Now, I know the problem of our entire economy being kept alive by unsustainable capital expenditure and questionable financial gains is not exactly shocking news to anybody anymore. In fact, if you are watching this video, there's a good chance your entire subscription feed hasn't shut up about the AI bubble all year. And in our defense, if this bubble pops, it will probably take the rest of the already shaky economy down with it. This also makes the fact that people are treating it like a foregone conclusion all the more dangerous. But perhaps we have all been missing the more important question, which is, what does a good outcome actually look like at this point? Is there any way that we could still quietly back out of this unscathed?
Google spending tens of billions of dollars to build 3 massive AI data centers.
Economists are saying electricity prices are climbing more than twice as fast as inflation is.
Some projections show that spending may be fueling nearly half of this year's estimated GDP growth.
Tech companies just are cutting tens of thousands of jobs, and some of them are blaming AI.
Now they are pivoting capital away from labor and towards AI infrastructure.
Okay, so to really hedge our bets, we need to look at the 3 ways this technology could pan out and what each of them would do to the economy that regular people live in. The optimistic outcome, where artificial intelligence becomes exponentially more capable and comprehensively substitutes human workers in almost every profession. The pessimistic outcome, where technology plateaus and it becomes clear that trillions of dollars worth of data centers were a huge waste of resources. And perhaps the scariest outcome of all, which is a scenario where this technology finds some useful applications, but overall just continues to be a bit meh. So the optimistic outcome is what most of the big AI companies and personalities are pitching to the world. That is, with the exception of Peter Thiel. I am not really sure what he wants.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well. Anyway, the idea of this scenario is that AI models and the tools they enable get so good that it renders most human work obsolete. And whatever human work is left becomes thousands of times more productive thanks to tools that do the non-creative work for us. Skilled trades are done by highly capable humanoid robots, logistics is fully automated, and even health and elderly services leverage mechanical muscles and mechanical minds to care for an aging population with a smaller group of actual doctors watching over everything. Eventually, the only jobs left will be those that need human creativity, assuming we can't automate that too. If you have always wanted to design your own video game, you won't need a full development team. You could just vibe code your way through production with AI tools, creating something that used to take thousands of real man-hours. Yes, I know a lot of you actual developers or skilled artisans are rolling your eyes right now. But remember, this is the dream scenario the AI companies are selling, and to play devil's advocate, it's kind of already happening. Even if you completely ignore the current focus on generative AI and robotics, there are hundreds of technologies that have already done the same thing. To use the example of making your own game again, there are modern development platforms and tools that have made it far easier for a single person to put together a pretty good game even working out of their bedroom. The same thing has happened across almost every industry in our economy. It's the reason why our labor productivity gets better and better almost every year, meaning for every hour that we work, we are producing more value. The optimistic view of new AI technology is that it will accelerate this trend so much that just a few hours of human labor, mostly to oversee the work of the machines, will produce enough value to give us a lifestyle we couldn't even dream of today. So yeah, even if we lose our 9-to-5 jobs, it won't really matter because there will be so much stuff getting made that only a minuscule amount of hours will need to be traded in return for everything you could ever need. In fact, for a lot of people, it could be so minimal that it's not really worth having any kind of formal employment at all. Everybody from Sam Altman to Jerome Powell has said the same thing about AI improving productivity, although admittedly with differing degrees of optimism. And the thing is, the idea itself isn't inherently wrong. But there is a small problem. Worker productivity has already increased by a lot for a number of reasons, including technology. But for at least 50 years, almost none of that increase has resulted in higher compensation for regular workers. So then, why would this time be any different? Well, the big AI players actually do have some answers to this obvious question, but these talking points need to be considered alongside some logical ironies that would almost be funny if they weren't so important. So the widening productivity compensation gap is one of the most hotly debated issues in all of economics because everybody has something different they would like to blame it on. Some people will say that migration has flooded the labor market with people who are willing to accept lower wages for the same job. Some people point to women entering the workforce, which also increased the total supply of workers. Some people point to outsourcing high labor industries like manufacturing, or technologies like computer systems that made the same amount of clerical work possible with a far smaller team. Then, of course, other people will say it's because labor unions were crippled in the early 1980s, which made it harder for workers to negotiate collectively and turn the jobs market into every man for themselves. Now, the reality is that it was probably a little bit of everything, because they all effectively did the same thing. Businesses got access to a greater supply of labor than they demanded, and without any negotiating power, that pushed labor prices down. AI is really just another technology that will mean businesses demand fewer employees to perform the same operations, and something that reduces negotiating power as well. A report published by the executive outplacement firm Challenger, Gray & Christmas tracks layoff announcements and categorizes them by type. This year, outside of federal worker layoffs from Doge, the #1 reason cited for layoffs was a cost-cutting shift towards AI. In total, since the firm started tracking this category of layoffs in 2023, more than 150,000 job losses have been directly attributed to this technology. Now, I know what you're about to say. Yes, a lot of companies are just claiming that they are doing layoffs because of AI, when really they just want an investor-friendly way of saying that they are cutting costs. But that's actually exactly the point. Even without the ultra-optimistic tools that could be made possible by this technology, it's already becoming a great negotiating tool against workers pushing the gap further apart rather than closing it. So this is where we get onto the narrative of living in a world of such material abundance that the idea of money becomes completely irrelevant. It's a nice idea, but there are a few problems. As I was putting this video together, a group of researchers from OpenAI very publicly resigned because they said that the company's economic studies were slowly being pushed into outright AI advocacy. If they found something that would present a future of AI in a negative light, they would just bury it and broaden the scope of their research until the results looked good. One of them was quoted saying, "The economic research team was veering away from doing real research and instead acting like its employer's propaganda arm." Now, this is just the word of one man, but he probably gave up a pretty big payday to get the message out, and it does align with other reports coming out of the organization. The technically separate organization Open Research conducted one of the biggest universal basic income experiments ever on low-income households. The results were mixed, at best, but the headline press releases were overly positive about how great an AI-powered UBI future will be for everybody. Now, maybe it shouldn't be shocking that research coming out of a company with a very clear motivation to push mass AI adoption would be a little bit biased, but the ironies do go deeper than that. Remember when OpenAI was a nonprofit and the founders didn't care about making money off it? Well, according to reports from Reuters, it is now gearing up to go public in a move that could net the CEO as much as $10 billion. Now, if only he still had any economists left on his team, they could tell him that all of that money will be meaningless in the coming AI utopia. Alright, joking aside though, it's pretty clear that even if this technology meets the expectations of even the most ambitious techno-optimists, there are very few systems in place to ensure that the increased productivity from AI actually benefits regular people. It's a lot of techno-pseudo-economic jargon to try and gloss over what you probably already know, which is that if the people that own these tools can make a lot of money off not needing to pay workers anymore, they are going to try their very best to do it. But that was the optimistic outcome. The most immediate fear that a lot of people have right now is that the hype around this technology will die off and bring down the entire economy with it. Again, as I was putting this video together, the jobs report for November was published after October was skipped due to the government shutdown. Overall, unemployment rose to 4.6%, with an additional 4.1% of people in part-time or gig work who would prefer to be working full-time. This is the highest it has been since 2021, and it's clearly trending upwards. This is also before revisions, which have consistently been downwards for every report so far this year. It's not great, but the numbers have been helped a lot by three standout categories. The first two were healthcare and social services, primarily to look after an aging and ailing population. The third category was construction, specifically specialized non-residential construction, or in plain English, all of those data centers. This was something that the BLS explicitly highlighted in its March report and has only become more relevant as the rate of data center buildouts accelerates and other government infrastructure projects are scaled back. Now, eventually this will be a problem because, theoretically, we're going to slow down on building these data centers at some point before we turn our entire solar system into a matryoshka brain.
So there's still like a lot of things. Like, I would love to go build a Dyson sphere on the solar system and like, you know, make the world's gigantic data center with the entire energy output of the sun. But obviously we can't do that right now, so that one has to like wait. couple decades.
Okay, my mistake. Well, at least for the next few decades, I guess. Anyway, the total employment up and down the supply chain for these buildouts is very hard to precisely calculate, but it is in the hundreds of thousands according to most industry estimates. A lot of this construction is also taking place in remote rural areas where these companies have been able to lobby for favorable local tax and regulatory treatments. Now, that whole game is a separate problem that I know that the old team over at Micro is actually making a video on, so I am not going to steal their thunder on exactly how messed up this can all get. But the point is, as it relates to employment, a lot of on-the-site workers doing this construction are only in these locations while buildouts are happening. That's very stimulating to the local economy for the 2 years it takes to get these facilities online. But if it slows down nationwide, it could have broader employment impacts beyond just the workers directly in the supply chain. Now, in the short term, even if this technology never becomes commercially viable, it could be written off as tech companies using the piles of cash they have accumulated to fund their own jobs program for a couple of years. It would be like if the wealthy old man from up the road paid you and your friends $1 million to dig a giant hole in his backyard. Would there have been a better way to use those resources? Probably, but it wouldn't cause any other ongoing problems, right? Well, it might actually, and we will get to that. But right now, the concern is about the existing problems it is covering up. $400 billion in capital expenditure this year alone is a pretty big economic stimulus. Nationwide, according to data from Bloomberg and Renaissance Macro, company spending on AI is now contributing more to GDP growth than consumer spending. That money is ultimately flowing from the big bank accounts of big tech firms and investment funds into the hands of thousands of businesses, suppliers, and workers. In fact, if we just look at the numbers alone, then in terms of money being pumped into an otherwise unhealthy economy, this is almost exactly the same as the combined stimulus and troubled asset relief program spending from 2008 to 2009 to stabilize the economy after the GFC. Now, of course, these payments are not as direct. And for now, the good news is that most of this money is still coming from cash reserves these companies already had, with borrowing mostly being used for cash flow purposes. But it should still give you a sense of scale as to how much economic activity is being generated on the contingency that AI hype continues. If that gets taken away very suddenly, it could quickly reveal how shaky everything else was under the surface. Then, of course, there is the wealth effect of people watching the green line go up. A lot of retirees and independently wealthy households have seen their investment portfolios almost double over just the last 5 years, which means that they have been a lot happier to spend conspicuously. This spending may be very uneven, but in theory at least, someone renovating their vacation home or buying a 5th sports car is at least giving money to contractors or a commission to a car salesman. A lot of people living off their investments actually have a set drawdown rate of about 3 to 4% for their everyday spending. You might have heard about the 4% rule for early retirement, and this rule prescribes that you don't spend more than 4% of the value of your invested assets every year so that you don't eat into your principal wealth. Now, if your portfolio doubles in value over 5 years, that means you can do twice as much spending without changing your 4% rule. Now, a lot of wealthier households are not this mathematically rigid, but the wealth effect happens subconsciously as well. My good friend Ben Felix has done a series of great videos on this subject, as well as a video he made last week analyzing the current risks in our very concentrated investment market. So if you're interested in a detailed breakdown of these ideas, I will leave a link to them below. If people see the value of their homes double, even though it's difficult to actually access those funds, they are still going to be more likely to get themselves to do something like a big remodel. Now, so far, this has actually helped to keep things ticking along. But it's also no secret that a lot of these companies might be a teensy bit overvalued. The only market worth disrupting after burning this much capital is the labor market. Even a small slice out of the $12 trillion worth of annual payroll could recoup these costs pretty quickly. But without that, investors are only going to have so much patience. Even then, it's not exactly this straightforward. One of the biggest ironies in this push to automate jobs is that the tech bros are trying to automate jobs that barely make any money in the first place. Uber drivers subsidize the wear, tear, and depreciation of their cars, and the taxpayer frequently subsidizes warehouse workers with food stamps. The financial reality behind taking these kinds of jobs with expensive technology is questionable at best. And if too many people start asking those questions, that could be a problem. If these values are reconsidered in a major way, then both infrastructure spending and investment-fueled household spending would fall simultaneously, seriously hurting employment. We have always wanted Green Line to go up, but never before has so much real employment depended on it. If this technology does turn out to be everything investors are hoping for, it's going to take our jobs. And if it becomes clear it can't do that, it will very likely crash a very frothy and concentrated market. And we are going to lose our jobs. It sounds pretty bad, right? Well, there is actually a third option. It's almost become the assumption that this will all end spectacularly, but there isn't actually any guarantee of that. For now, the companies involved have more than enough cash between them to cover outside debt. And even if less liquid players like OpenAI can't meet the record-setting spending obligations with companies like Oracle, the recourse to actually collect on those payments isn't very strong. Nobody wants to sue the next person along from them in the financial circle jerk.
I'm so happy that my lawyers have something to do. I'm so happy that I get to sue how money works and show them how the legal system works.
Well, almost nobody, I suppose. Anyway, to keep their own market stable, the most likely thing to happen is that these companies just take equity in exchange for compute time or quietly renegotiate commitments behind the scenes and just stretch them out over longer periods of time. So, even if advancements continue to slow down, this could plod along for a lot longer than you might expect. But in the long term, this kind of scenario could actually be an equally damaging outcome. Consistent investment into AI above anything else is going to starve other hopeful technologies of getting the funding they need for development. The joke about putting AI in the name of the company to get investment is true, but a lot of companies do it because they need that investment to develop their product. An anecdotal example I saw while putting this video together was the startup Boom Supersonic. It has been raising money for the past decade to develop a modern supersonic passenger jet aircraft. Now, maybe you think faster air travel is a worthy technology to pursue. Maybe you don't. But that doesn't really matter. The point is that this month they came out with a new product, which was basically taking one of their jet engines and attaching it to a generator, which they were pitching as a new and innovative way to power data centers. Now, this of course is just one example, but startups trying to develop new technologies are all being forced to play some version of the same game to keep funding going. On a larger scale, there has been a big push towards reshoring manufacturing. This may very well be a noble goal with strategic value, but it's also made much harder by rising energy costs and electrical grids that need to support factories as well as data centers. Right now, the data centers can just afford to pay more, which means factories and regular households have to suffer the financial consequences. The same kind of financial crowding out is happening in a lot of markets already. The reason you are going to need to sell a kidney to afford 2 gigs of RAM is because the entire production base is being redirected towards serving this one industry. Going all in on one hand may or may not pay off, but it also means we don't have any chips left to take better bets if and when they come along. And the thing is, we've kind of already bet our entire economy on this one technology working out. The value of the entire stock market has nearly doubled over the last 5 years. This has been driven almost entirely by just 10 companies whose growth was in turn driven almost entirely by the promise of AI. Most people understand that this isn't sustainable, but they also understand that technology like this has changed the world before. Improvements are slowing down as new models are showing disappointing improvements, but every day we are discovering new things we can do with these products. For every argument, there is a counter-argument. You don't need to watch another video speculating about the future of AI because the truth is nobody has a damn clue. But what we can do is look back over these last 3 years and find out how much this whole game has cost us, because the numbers are not good.
It's almost like investors are saying 100 million isn't enough, Deirdre, make it 2.
And we're told that Zuckerberg at that time really said, okay.
I'm thrilled we get to do this in the United States of America. I think this will be the most important project of this era.
The dormant nuclear reactors at 3 Mile Island, because decades after a partial reactor meltdown shut down part of the facility.
Okay, so everybody has been paying a lot of attention to the astronomical valuations that have been assigned to everything even partially AI related. And they have also been paying attention to billions of dollars in value vanishing into thin air whenever Jensen Huang sneezes the wrong way. Now, to be fair, we kind of have to pay attention to it, because that's all of our retirement savings tied up in this fun little game. But all of this value probably means a lot less than you think. Market capitalization, which is what most AI headlines focus on, is simply a calculation of how many shares are in circulation multiplied by what number the last speculator in line made a trade at. If Nvidia halves in value, that doesn't mean that $2 trillion has been destroyed. It just means we have put a new price tag on what this business does. Just like if Walmart marks down a banana from $10 to $5, it hasn't destroyed $5. The actual numbers we should be paying attention to are the actual resources that we have put into this system versus what we have gotten back out. And by resources, you can't just think of cash. Cash is really just the receipt for resources. So while dollars are a great unit to tally everything up, what we should instead be keeping track of is how many cold, hard, tangible Age of Empire style resources we have used to fuel this one particular tech tree. Because only then can we find out if this is really making the world a richer place. Alright, so How do we do that? Well, we can start from a simple analysis of the direct business expenses taken on by companies desperate to stay ahead of their competitors. And after that, we can work down to the less tangible stuff, like the opportunity cost of sanctioning China over AI chips or dedicating some of the world's best researchers to producing whatever the hell this is. The first major resource being used to fuel this machine is the most obvious one: all of those chips. In our Amazon video released just a month ago, the tally for AI capital expenditure amongst just 4 of the top tech companies had reached $200 billion for the year and $60 billion for the most recent reported quarter alone. But since that video went live, new filings have come out, and now, according to company reports collated by Bloomberg, spending for this year is already on track to hit $344 billion. That is more than 1% of America's entire GDP being used building compute infrastructure to develop and operate new models. Now, if this sounds just a little bit dumb to you, don't worry. It's actually worse than you think. For one thing, this number only includes the top 4 tracked public firms: Meta, Google, Microsoft, and the biggest spender of all, Amazon. Smaller businesses or private companies like OpenAI are not included in these numbers because they don't have to release financial information. But from the outside, we can still make some educated guesses. The scale and frequency of fundraising taking place at OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, is growing exponentially every year, even as they have started squeezing out revenue. In March this year, the company received $40 billion from investors in the largest private tech deal in history. And then, just 4 months later, they raised another $8.3 billion. Every time they do this, their existing investors are giving up some of their stake in the company. So the only reason they would go ahead with it is if they really needed the money, which they do, mostly to keep on building new compute capacity. The second reason this spending is probably even worse than it looks has a lot to do with accounting. Capital expenditure just means businesses spending money on fixed assets like land, vehicles, and in this instance, gigantic data centers. For the accountants, this distinction is important, because if a company makes $1 million in gross profit and then spends $1 million buying a building, it doesn't get to subtract the total purchase from its revenue up front like it would if it spent $1 million on a regular expense like salaries. Instead, they have to use a depreciation schedule, which accounts for how much value an item loses with every year of use in line with industry standards. For server equipment, that is 5 years, which means if a company spent $1 million on a fancy new rack of NVIDIA GPUs, they would only be able to claim $200,000 a year as actual expenses against their taxes. Normally, companies want to maximize this depreciation to minimize their tax liability, artificially making things look worse in the business than they actually are, as far as the IRS is concerned. But right now, they are kind of doing the opposite. Chips that were state-of-the-art in 2022 when ChatGPT first launched are almost completely useless in today's modern AI data centers and are largely not even worth the energy to run. It's highly unlikely that the billions of dollars in chips that they are buying right now are going to take 5 years to fully depreciate, even though that is what it's going to say on their official financial statements. This treadmill of technology has created a higher level of spending than any other project in history, and what is easy to forget with all of these insane numbers being thrown around is that these are resources that could have been used elsewhere. One way that you could interpret these numbers is that the rapidly escalating AI arms race has become an incredibly efficient machine that turns investor dollars into e-waste with a byproduct of brain rot. But maybe we are getting ahead of ourselves. So far, total spending on just this technical hardware alone has amounted to around $1 trillion by just these 4 companies. According to data from Stanford, Chinese state-owned enterprises have invested an additional $500 billion into AI infrastructure. And then every other organization in the world that isn't Amazon, Meta, Google, or Microsoft has dropped in another $500 billion working backwards off the sales data from NVIDIA and AMD. But that's just the first item on the budget sheet. And these companies are finding out the hardware is the cheap part. The costs of getting AI to where it is now have already been staggering. But when you do a cost-benefit analysis, it's also important to look at, well, the benefits. The only problem is, those benefits have been surprisingly hard to find. A report by MIT tracked 300 companies implementing generative AI into their workflows on an enterprise level. Despite an additional $30 to $40 billion of investment, which we can add to the tally, the study found that 95% of the organizations generated 0 returns from AI. Now, for what it's worth, I would like to say that I don't want to completely write off AI, even though I know it's sometimes really easy to hate on how it's being sold to the world. AI, like most new technologies, is coming along with a bit too much hype. But underneath that, there are some cool things you can do with it. I know I have used this example before, but even here at Little Ol' Works Media Group, we used to spend hours every week cutting out images to use as assets in our videos. Now, most of that can be done with AI tools letting our editors actually work on something creative, or just getting some time to go out and touch grass. These are real practical tools that have helped make someone's working day easier, more productive, and less monotonous. The problem with this, though, is that when companies, governments, and non-profit organizations have poured trillions of dollars into developing this technology, useful practical tools are not good enough. Companies want to be able to replace their workforce, not make their work slightly easier. Governments want a superintelligence, not something that can trim out JPEGs. And honestly, I don't even want to know what someone like Peter Thiel wants.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
Yes?
I don't know. I would... yes.
Okay.
But whatever these grand ambitions end up being, the bill is adding up. And we haven't even got to the big expense yet. Energy. Earlier this month, a group of AI researchers started making headlines after they returned from a tour of facilities in China. Their claim was that America had probably already lost the AI arms race, not because China had better technology or researchers, but because they had an actual functional electric grid. According to the Department of Energy in a report, the foundation of America's electrical grids were built in the 1960s and 70s, and a lot of the infrastructure is still being used today, well past the end of its intended life cycle. China has industrialized much more recently than we have here in America, so while our grid is barely holding on, they have had the advantage of practically building theirs from scratch with more modern technology. Now, this still hasn't been cheap for them, but since the 1990s, while America's economy has been primarily fueled by consumer spending, China's has grown on exports and construction. According to their national statistics and corroborated by Bloomberg Intelligence, the country spent nearly $2.3 trillion on infrastructure in 2022 alone, compared to $1.1 trillion worth of spending in the US, spread out over 5 years. This is not to say what China is doing is a good idea either. This kind of spending has put them in a potentially ruinous amount of debt. But the reason this is important for the AI discussion is because Chinese grids frequently run with energy reserve margins of 100%, which means it has twice the energy capacity it needs, whereas in America, we operate with margins of just 15% according to the researchers who made this report. That means that AI data centers in China are actually a useful way to soak up extra energy capacity, while the same facilities here in America are a strain on already crumbling infrastructure. The International Energy Agency estimates that data centers accounted for 1.5% of the world's electricity consumption in 2024, and is projected to double by 2030 if current trends continue with AI. If you were to get that out of your outlet at home, 450 terawatt hours spread out over the last 3 years only would have cost you around $18 billion, assuming you were able to negotiate wholesale rates of about $40 per megawatt hour. That's actually not bad, but it's far from the whole story. That's just the cost that the AI operators will pay, not everybody else. You've probably noticed that your electricity has become more expensive over recent months. Or maybe you haven't because, let's be honest, everything has become more expensive over recent months. But anyway, I want to play a little game. This is average energy prices across American cities according to the BLS. Can you see anything that stands out? Let me give you a hint. Major AI development really kicked off right here. Now, the war in Ukraine, more EVs, and overall inflation played a part in this too. But here in America, we never really relied on Russian energy. Before the recent surge in AI, electricity prices were actually declining compared to inflation. But now they have almost doubled within the last 3 years alone. This is costing us all in more ways than just the big beautiful energy bills we have to deal with every month. Other industries like manufacturing also use a lot of energy, and if they have to pay twice as much for this crucial input, they are going to pass those costs along to all of us and be less competitive in global markets. According to the Energy Information Administration, end-use electricity expenditures totaled $419 billion in 2021 before this jump. They have not published data on 2024 yet, but if we are using more electricity and paying almost twice as much for it, the actual cost felt across the economy is easily an additional $400 billion. Again, this is just in America. Now, some of the largest AI players have responded to these market conditions by just commissioning their own power plants, but other businesses are pursuing a more tried and tested approach, begging the government to fix their problems for them. Big tech companies have been lobbying hard to get money allocated to upgrade energy infrastructure. They are using the threat of moving their operations offshore if their needs aren't met, which is an effective message since the government sees this as such a strategic industry. Now, if we end up getting a better electrical grid because some big tech companies wanted it, maybe that might actually be an example of political lobbying accidentally doing some good. But according to the University of Texas Energy Institute report, this could take trillions of dollars, and nobody is arguing that the grid doesn't need an upgrade. The problem is that nobody else is getting a say as to whether there are better places to be spending that money first. The real question is, though, are there really better places to be investing right now? If everybody has agreed that this is a bubble, then why are informed investors still piling billions of dollars into it every month? Are they dumber than us, or do they see something that regular people don't? Now, I want to say that, for the record, I think this whole thing is absolutely cooked. However, the best way to really understand something is to not seek out information that confirms your beliefs, but instead those that challenge them. So, to play devil's advocate, how is it possible that this whole thing is not just speculative mania? Now, the thing about bubbles is that usually they take some kind of outside force to pop them. The dot-com collapse was kicked off by a combination of factors, but 3 really stand out. Microsoft being sued for violation of antitrust laws, MicroStrategy doing a massive revising of their financial results, causing their stock to fall 60% in a single day and getting them into hot water with the SEC, and a single article that pointed out the unviable business model that a lot of dot-com companies were running on. A few years later, the housing bubble was popped by the subprime mortgage crisis, which itself was kicked off by rate resets and loan originators filing for bankruptcy. So if the AI industry was in a bubble, it's had a lot of things that have come a long way which could have popped it. Market instability around tariffs, legislative controls over AI chips, rising interest rates, legal challenges over training data, organizational shocks, infrastructure problems, concerning studies over business use cases, and what looks like increasingly desperate attempts to generate any kind of revenue. That's not to mention that if one article back in 2000 could start unraveling the dot-com bubble, surely the daily articles coming out about the problems in this industry should do the same, right? Well, so far at least, the market has pretty much just shrugged all of this off, and it's been able to do this for 3 very important reasons. The first is where all of this money is actually coming from. Over the last decade and a half, big US tech companies have slowly built up an enormous pile of cash. Outside of insurance or financial firms, which are legally mandated to have cash on hand for compliance reasons, tech companies like Microsoft, Meta, Apple, and Alphabet have more cash than any other companies on the planet after saving it away for the better part of 2 decades. They had been doing this for 2 reasons. The first was that before 2017, tax laws heavily incentivized shifting cash into offshore accounts primarily held in Ireland. The exact structures that they used to erode these profits into a haven like this were very complicated. But once the cash was there, they couldn't really touch it unless they wanted to pay tax on it. This means that they just slowly accumulated cash waiting for something to use it on. However, in 2017, these companies were offered a one-time deal to bring back these offshore savings into America for a small tax concession, which gave them all a lot of dry powder to make some big local investments. Now, they have used a lot of that money to do share buybacks, and they have kept a lot of it abroad to fund their international operations, but they also earmarked billions for future capital expenditures. Now, the second reason they built such huge cash reserves was because for a while, these companies were actually struggling to find projects worth investing in. They had become so dominant in their respective markets that spending a lot of money on development was seen as an unnecessary expense that wasn't really worth the risk. Today, that has obviously changed, and the big companies that are driving most of the expenditure on data centers are almost making up for a lost decade where they were arguably not investing enough money into new projects. This also applies to all of the money they are introducing into the system to support less established firms like OpenAI. Sure, the money is getting passed around a lot once it's in the system, but the initial source of these funds is largely coming from piles of cash these companies had sitting on the sidelines. This means compared to something like the housing bubble, which was propped up on a lot of debt and rigid derivatives, these companies are at least building atop a solid fiscal foundation. Now, of course, having a strong foundation does not guarantee that the house you build on top of it will also be good. Similarly, just because these companies happen to be holding on to trillions of dollars doesn't necessarily mean that setting it all on fire to chase one single bet is a good idea. It also doesn't mean that regular investors won't get burned if this money suddenly gets yoinked back off the table. One of the most concerning trends that has developed in this space is the circular dealing between all of the companies involved in different areas of this industry. We first covered this about 2 months ago when Oracle's stock price spiked after reporting a huge data center rental commitment from OpenAI, who had raised billions of dollars from Nvidia, who made that money in the first place by selling graphics cards to companies like Oracle. Since then, the deals have only gotten bigger, and reporters have done a really good job piecing together just how far and wide this web of financial fuckery goes. Now, most commentary has rightfully called this out as companies pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps. They are making their revenue look better than they really are by investing in their own customers. Not exactly a sustainable business model. However, to play devil's advocate again, there is something to be said about this strategy from a risk mitigation perspective. When people look back with the benefit of hindsight at the dot-com bubble, they all say the same thing. Yeah, the market was dumb, but after a major correction, there were still some big winners that emerged, some of them being the same tech companies involved in the AI market right now. Nvidia investing into a company like OpenAI right now looks a little bit suspicious, but had a company like AOL invested in Amazon back in 1999, we would probably be a little less critical. By investing up and down the supply chain, if you could call it that, these companies are in theory maximizing the chance that they will capture the value eventually generated through AI. There is also one other really important detail that a lot of people gloss over when exposing this financial circle jerk. It's easy to look at this and conclude that this whole market is just a Ponzi scheme popped up by investor hype. The only problem with that deduction, though, is that they aren't really taking investors' money. Netted out, the major players in this industry are paying out far more money through dividends and stock buybacks than they are taking in through stock issuance or borrowing. When compared again to the dot-com bubble, the story was very different. Hyped companies were dependent on bringing in a continuous stream of investor money to keep the lights on in businesses that made no profit, and often didn't even make any revenue. A company like OpenAI is also in this position, where if they don't keep on bringing in new investors, they won't be able to continue operating. But they are not raising money from regular investors. They are primarily getting it off companies that have plenty of cash to invest. Now, I am not exactly going to say I feel bad for big tech companies, but nothing they do with their money right now is going to be popular. If they make capital investments into data centers, people will say they are blowing their money on chips that will be obsolete in 2 years' time. If they buy their own shares, people will call them out for driving up demand on an already overvalued stock. And if they buy shares in other companies, people will call them out for circular dealing. Yeah, I know. I am sure they are truly devastated. Now, with all of that said, that doesn't mean that these companies and the wider economy are completely safe. Share prices are clearly elevated on the expectation that AI products and services will eventually bring in trillions of dollars to major participants in this industry. If this doesn't pan out, then those prices could be reconsidered very quickly. The major incumbent players aren't at immediate risk of collapse, because they still have far more cash than debt, and they still have functional parts of the business to fall back on. Their biggest risk is that if this does go tits up, then they will have to explain to their investors why they thought it was better to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on redundant data centers instead of just paying out that money to them. Now, nobody can truly predict what the future of AI will look like, and even the CEOs themselves have admitted that, but they are framing it like this. They are betting $500 billion on a dice roll. If it comes up 6, they will make $10 trillion. It's a risky bet, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad bet. Oh, and it takes the sting off knowing that the government will probably be there to comp them some chips if they just keep the game going, but we don't say that part out loud. Now, if you are still not convinced, don't worry. I'm not convinced either. But go and watch this extended cut next to see why we might just not be able to trust the numbers anyway. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.